Hi, Joanne. I want to welcome you to this talk we're going to have in celebration of National Poetry Month. And I am Sheila Bender, writing it real. And here we have today with us Joanne Clarkson, a poet of many books and many activities in the poetry world. And I'm going to start by reading from your website, your bio. And on it, you say, I was blessed with poetic genes. My psychic grandmother gave card readings in the back of her sister's millinery shop. She taught me worlds beyond this one. My grandfather, on my father's side, a brutal alcoholic who died before I was born, gave me my last name, Mokash. By chance, I discovered that Mokos was the ancient Slavic mother goddess of weaving and weather. I have claimed her. Joanne Clarkson went to Seattle University intending to become a nurse, but failed, she says, emotionally, and turned instead to literature. A few years later, she earned her master's degree in English, and while she lived in Illinois, she pursued a master's in library and information science and worked as a professional librarian for many years. After caring for her mother through a long illness until her death, she re-careered as an RN, specializing in hospice and geriatrics, work she continues to practice. She is a wife, a mother, and a grandmother, and might I say, a fabulous poet. So I want to start by saying this has been an unusual year, of course, for all of us. And here we are, almost out of it, we hope. And many of us have talked about how the pandemic has changed our lives, our writing, our time to write, our focus, all kinds of things. So I thought maybe you could tell us how that was for you in your poetry life.
Well, the whole pandemic thing was complicated for us by the fact that my husband had to have emergency open heart surgery that ended up being scheduled on March the 10th last year, which was just at the beginning of COVID. And that was a horrific experience. The surgery was amazing. The guy saved his life. It was remarkable. And he's been so much better since then. But the experience in the hospital was horrible. It was, in fact, I have a poem that I can read about some of it, but, my heart ached for the staff, though, having been a healthcare professional, and worked in a setting similar to that. They didn't know what to do. And the CDC didn't even know what to do. It wasn't until 2 days later they actually declared the thing a pandemic. So first, the whole family showed up for surgery, but only I was allowed in on the day of surgery. That was okay. The girls were really good about it. And then the next day I got to come and be with him all day. But the day after, they came in the morning and said, everyone has to leave. Only patients can be in the hospital. And so they kicked everybody out. And this was very traumatic. Jim had just come out of ICU. He was still critical. And of course, having your loved ones at your bedside being supportive is a huge part of healing. And so this was, and then they were way understaffed because everybody that even looked like they had a cold or an allergy, like you were saying, couldn't come to work. So they couldn't really, so they were under extreme stress and they didn't know what to do. I remember as I was being literally almost hauled out of there with everyone else, somebody had sent this beautiful flower display to one of the patients and the nurses were looking at each other and the one nurse says, throw it in the garbage, it's not on the list. Wow. So they threw it in the garbage.
You wrote from that experience?
I did.
Read that to us now that you've told us the story.
I will. And then so what I did, of course, was go to a hotel because I couldn't stay with Jim. And actually, after that, a very generous cousin of mine offered me her condo downtown. So I had a place to stay at least while I was waiting. But this poem is called The Ultimate Alone. Hospital rules now allow no one at the bedside, not wife, not lover. Pandemic too dangerous to permit those not critical within the walls of terminal healing. Death thought to be transmitted by touch and breath. She sits on the edge of a king-size bed in a hotel 5 blocks away, watches lips shape fear on the silent TV screen. She hasn't eaten, can't cry, haunted by his failing heart, forfeit to machines. Who is the enemy here? Hours before, she had seen a man who spoke no English, desperate to reach his suffering wife, dragged away by security. And a woman sobbing, forced from her Alzheimer's vigil, the confused husband trying to follow, falling, not comprehending why she would leave him after 53 years. Health known to be transmitted by touch and familiar breathing. There are reasons for rules, the muted voices on CNN announce, to defend from the spread of virus for the sake of community. She doesn't believe them, knows he's grieving, maybe pleading, my God, why have you abandoned me? As a hospice nurse used to tell her patients, no one dies alone. If family must be absent, the old ones take you home. But here in quarantine, even angels have been banned, chapel empty of saints. No rules get it right without exception. Predators isolate prey, which the virus seems to know. Through thin hotel walls, she hears others sighing, ghost steps creaking from bed to empty window. She wonders if her heartbeat leaves her body. Can it cross vacant streets, bore through hospital brick? Can he feel it pulsing for them both? New rhythm born in the ultimate alone.
The repetition of breath and touch is so moving because that's what we rely on in each other.
It is what we rely on.
Beautiful and sad. And I'm so glad that Jim did well and got out of there. But yeah, the chaos around the beginning of all of this and how it affected you in particular. It's interesting that you write in third person. Do you want to say how that happened? Why you took the third person?
Well, I felt I could, how should I say, I could make it, I could write better if it was, sometimes if you're too close to something, it's more difficult. So I kind of objectified this woman. And I also wanted to, there were all sorts of people, not just me, there were 40 rooms in that wing where Jim was. That's 40 people who had to leave their loved ones. And, you know, so I wanted to make it speak for all of us, I guess, because everybody was feeling that. And it's still, you know, it's still true. They just opened up. You can visit people in nursing homes now. Hospitals are getting a little more lenient. But that was Jim's big fear about his recent surgery, was that he'd get stuck in the hospital and I couldn't come in.
Because you lived through that at one point.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So, but.
Yeah. Well, are there other ways besides?
See, but moving on to things that are a little, boy, look at that sunshine. Yeah, wow.
You're getting some too.
But anyway, so then
Joanne, are there other ways in which being slowed down, say, by the pandemic affected your life as a poet?
Yeah, I think I heard so many of my writer friends say it was really hard to muster creative energy like we were used to. There were so many things that were threats and so many things that were just not possible. You couldn't go places you used to go. You couldn't see your friends. You couldn't see your loved ones. So we did, like you've been doing, turn to Zoom. And it was kind of cool for me because I got to connect again with two writing groups that I belonged to in Olympia. And I'd seen those people just intermittently, and they both started working through Zoom groups. And so they invited me to come back. So that was fun. I got to see my good friends and work with them again. And so that was a good thing. And although, like many others, I didn't feel maybe as energetic, or a little bit of fear and apprehension kind of niggling at you all over, at least makes me less spontaneous, less able to get into maybe a higher place that I write from. But I was going to say made myself. That isn't a good word. I allowed myself or encouraged myself to still sit in my poetry space every morning like I always did. And I always start by reading other people's work and then doing some writing on my own. And I thought of taking an online course, and I looked at a couple, but none really resonated right away. So I had gotten, just a few weeks before the surgery, there's a really cool, like half-price bookstore in Redmond where our daughter Carolyn lives. And I'd gone there, and I'd happened to find a copy of Best American Poetry 2019. And I love these Best American Poetry books because sometimes I tend to always go back to old favorites. I read Mary Oliver, I read Elizabeth Bishop, I read, people that I know that I love. And it's really interesting to discover other people that you love. And so I started by giving myself a practice that I would read 3 or 4 of the poems out of the book. And then the really cool thing about these books, in case you aren't acquainted with them, is in the back, the poet tells why they wrote the poem. And that's the most interesting part of it sometimes. And so you get kind of clued into the poetic process, which I always love to know, why did you write that? Or why do you write? Or, who are you? And so that became really interesting for me. And then I ordered, I got 2017 and 2018. And then they happened to have I think I got this for $1.50. It's 2014. And so a bunch of them, I could keep doing that. And through that, I discovered some really interesting trends in poetry, new poets I wasn't as aware of. And it really was cool. And it inspired me to write in a different way a little bit.
So do you have one of those poems that's a different way?
Well, I was going to say, actually, I just grabbed a couple of these to show. The most interesting thing in Poetry 2018, there's maybe 50 poems in each of these. There aren't a whole lot, And out of that one, about 20 of them were sonnets. And sonnets in 2018, how weird is that? And Dana Goya, Goia, was the editor, and he's a formalist and a classicist, which is why he picked those kind of poems. But I got to thinking, well, maybe I should try some formal verse. Maybe I should try to write a sonnet, which is really, 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 really hard. A lot of moderns, in fact, the way I discovered that 20 of them were sonnets was because, how should I say, very few people that write sonnets now write in iambic pentameter with every other line rhyming. As long as you got 14 lines there, somehow you got a sonnet that seems to, okay, whoa. But I decided that, to me at least, I would kind of stick with more traditional things. And the one thing that, like Terence Hayes wrote Sonnets to My Past and Future Assassin. He wrote a whole bunch of them with the same title, which is a really cool title. And although his didn't have the traditional forms, all his language sounded together. He'd have one sound that he'd carried through. It wasn't always a rhyme, but it was a sound. So doing all that investigation of the sonnet form made me really, really aware of sounds throughout a poem. So I wrote about 8 of them, and about 3 of them are good, any good. And so I'll read you one of the ones that I think is okay. Sonnets are not my thing. I'm not going to become a sonneteer, but it was a good exercise. It's called An Older Woman Revisits the Moon. I am now given to the tarnished wane, nights when the full lunar face turns slowly away, begins to erase herself, cold halo of a fallen saint. I have found I can make do with less, fewer vanities, quieter desires. I pass a mirror and neither pause nor curse, tutored by the moon's dimming fickleness. The morning of my mother's death, dawn of my daughter's birth, both under a crescent I completed with the shadow of my life. My breath is now the mist that clouds the moonstone. What light is left is mine and mine alone.
I'd say that's pretty darn good.
Thank you. That sounded better when I read it.
14 lines. Did you try for any other parts of the form? Or did you really just think 14 lines would be enough to call it a sonnet?
I thought 14 lines would probably do it. That was hard enough. Sonnets take a long time.
Yeah.
And so they don't sound contrived. That one, the reason I like that one better than some of the others is because it flows. And although the lines do rhyme at the end, if you look at it, you don't notice it when you're reading. Or off rhyme. Some of them are off.
Just listening to your story and when this took place, you're deciding to do the exercise in practice. I mean, it does really, when you say realizing, the speaker, you saying, realizing I could do with less. it just immediately put me into these times where we
Oh,
realized
yeah.
how much of what we had been doing is not necessary, and perhaps not necessary to our inner lives. And, you know, all poets are obsessed, they say, with death and mortality. But I think that given the numbers we were hearing of deaths every day, how could anyone not be? But so
Exactly.
beautiful to project who you are onto the moon and the cycles of the moon, and then the birth of a daughter and the death of a mother, or the opposite, I think is the way you do it. Just beautiful. Now, I don't know that you would do this for me, but I'm tempted to ask you, what would a not good one sound like if this one was only okay and it was great?
Um, I could pull one up, but
How do you feel about that?
I don't care. No, it's a really good practice, and I would encourage anybody to try to write formal verse, because it really forces you, for one thing, to think very. Hello, there. No, yes.
Your computer.
Whatever. It's slow for some reason. Here it goes.
But
It's got that hourglass. It's thinking.
What you were saying about writing in form forces you to
really think about how words work together, meter. You know, you don't. When I write, I notice when it doesn't flow, but I usually don't consciously count the syllables.
Yeah.
And if you're really writing a traditional sonnet, of course, you got to have iambic pentameter. Mm-hmm. So let's see, 2020. I have a little folder for them, Sonnets 2020.
I'm really happy that you'll share that with us, because it's very rare that we get to hear things that the poet doesn't like, or maybe that they didn't turn out as well as they could have. And I think it's very reassuring to other people's practice to know that it's true, just what you said, that they're not always as good. Like William Stafford is quoted as saying he wrote a poem every day, and people would say, how could you do that? And he'd say, well, some are better than others.
Yes. He was very prolific. So was the sun. Okay. Now, this isn't a horrible poem, but I don't like it as well as the moon poem, and I haven't sent it out because of that. But of course, you and I both live in this incredibly beautiful place. And you know, if you had to be stuck somewhere during a pandemic, in this beautiful place where I can walk down to the beach every day and look at the ocean and, you know, contemplate the sea and seashells and our beautiful trees and my garden, you couldn't really have asked for a nicer place to do that. So this poem is about anemones. There's a lot of anemones on the rocks down there at Cape George Beach. So this is called, well, at first I called it immortal weed, but then people are thinking about stuff like dandelions and stuff. So I ended up calling it immortal seaweed. And I think one thing I don't like about it is the title, but we'll go with that. Immortal seaweed. Anemones do not bleed. Anemones do not court mist or decision. They cling. They swing lovely green and pink arms. Caught in a determined knife of tide, one day they simply divide. And then there are two on the same barnacled stone, identical. Moving within a chamberless heart, they view through blind fingers, sensual tentacles tasting mostly fear. They retract at the touch of wind, too much sun, intentional probe. Each can fold into a jellied circle, swollen clutch of wounded eye, molding lobe within a lobe of sea brain. Which is the prime anemone? Which the last? Riddle of the endless sea.
Well,
it isn't awful, but it isn't quite as smooth as
well,
the first.
It's very different than the one in which you were connecting emotionally to the moon and the cycles of life. And this one, your powers of observation are really there. I feel like I'm standing at the beach with you and really looking at the anemones and really thinking about the way they move. And some of your ways of describing them, about not needing to make decisions, not needing to have that kind of life. They're just there in the water, embraced by the water, is very interesting. And I think that you're going to find a way to like this poem better when you have a title that you like better. And, you know, in a way, you called it Immortal Seaweed. Well, it could just be immortal because they are. And what you were seeing was a sort of changing but never changing sort of thing. A life,
Exactly.
a life without having to make decisions. So I think it stands for something. And I think that, thank you for reading one that you would consider in progress. And we know where it came from. So the practice, the doing it. And so what every writer I know has said is you write better and better the more you write. That the idea of a writer is one who writes. And we have to keep writing. The more we write, the better we become, even if we're writing things we don't like. It's the idea of staying in practice. So that was a wonderful.
It's a practice. Yes, I absolutely believe that. And it's my practice. I've had it all my life. And so it's like practicing the piano or practicing anything, you just do it.
Right.
And even if I don't feel like it, sometimes when I get into it, then I do.
Exactly. And I think for some of us coming to writing, especially older people who have a history of being great readers, can't let themselves get into the practice because all they see is the finished products. Right. And so they go, I can't do that. And it's like, well, no, because you didn't start.
Yes.
You can't get there unless you're drafting and consciously redrafting, if it means that. But just the act of writing endows us with more skill. And whether or not we're in class. Yeah. So would you like to read to us from, I know you said that during the pandemic, you put together a chapbook. And
I did. And now I've got a full-length book put together. And I keep, when you're putting together a collection, as I did with the Fates and Believing the Body, and it has to be kind of around a common theme. It can't just be a whole bunch of poems that you've already published or that you like the best and want them together. It doesn't work. And this isn't the book you want anyway. So the Fates was so easy because there was this wonderful organizing principle. I wanted to talk about fate anyway, but we had the three of them. There's three of them. Well, you can't do the muses because there's like 12. That would be a really long book, or else really short sections. Even like the Pleiades have 7. So I think I let go of goddesses for a while and tried to find an organizing principle. I started out, I have a poem called Totem Pilgrim, which is about, actually, we saw those, if you go to the museum in Victoria, I think it's the Royal British Museum, there's a whole room of totem poles. I just love totem poles. And of course, we have a couple downtown here in Port Townsend. So I wrote, I was inspired by a totem pole and the fact that I don't have a totem animal. So anyway, so I had enough animal poems. So I tried to put together a chapbook kind of around the totem animal thing. Didn't work. I didn't have enough that made sense or that I thought were strong enough. And the ones that I thought were stronger that I tried to backdoor in just didn't work. So I did publish a poem last year called Intimacies of Water. And it's about me washing my neighbor's hair when she was sick. Mm-hmm. And it was published in the American Journal of Nursing, which is very cool because it's a place I'd always wanted to publish. And that poem has like 3 or 4 sections in it, kind of. And it has to do with healing because although I'm now retired from nursing and don't do active hospice nursing anymore, those people that I cared for, those brave, wonderful people and their caregivers still continue to inspire me, and I continue to write poems about them. And so I wanted to be able to include them in my book and also include what I'm writing now, which is a lot of stuff about our beautiful seashore and the beautiful place where we live here in Port Townsend. So I ended up calling the book and chapbook that I'm working on now, still in process, but it's called Intimacies of Water. And so I got so every poem in there has some mention of water or rain or washing or something wet's in there. And so it's kind of, I'm kind of doing that, and that's beginning to work.
Can you tell us, how do you define a chapbook? How many pages? How many poems?
A chapbook, 24-ish to 30-ish, not more than 30 usually, because usually when you're entering them in contests, which is both how I got my other books published, they tell you, and usually the most you can ever have for a chapbook is usually 40, and the least you can ever have for a full-length collection is 40. So I usually aim for like 30-ish for the chapbook and 50-ish if I can find good ones for that.
So why, after publishing several books and having yet another one that's ready, Tell me about why you want a chapbook. Why would you want a shorter book?
Our book. Well, partly it's just practicality. If I'm going to get a book published, I want a publisher that's going to promote it besides just me. Especially now with COVID, the big thing for everybody now, there's no poetry readings. There's no in-person poetry readings, I should say. I've done a couple of those online too. But you're not going to sell as many books as if you're standing up there and people are looking you in the eye and they feel guilty if they don't buy your book. Just saying, but it's the intimate contact too. It isn't just the guilt. They want your poems after they hear you.
To hear things in the poet's voice.
Well, and it's easier if you're standing there with a stack of books, and if they have to drive downtown or order it on Amazon,
and you can sign it for them.
And anyway, but the book is a work in itself. It's like a larger poem in itself, and it's easier to do a chapbook because it's easier to find 25 poems that sound alike and have some common thread while still being different than to get 60 or 70 of them you can organize. So I thought but I guess I got off the track a little bit. When you look in Poets and Writers or Duotrope or Submittable or all these places that list publishers that are looking for poems, they have these contests, and there's a lot of contests for chapbooks. And they give you like $500 to $1,000, and then you get the book, and then you also get it promoted by them, which is a huge help because the point is to have people read it. And I do write unabashedly for the general public, not just for my grandchildren, who one of them probably cares, the rest of them I'm not so sure. They're kind of young.
They care later.
They care later, I guess. But so I want to reach this wider audience. And so I thought if I started, when I put together the Fates, I may have mentioned this in our previous interview, I went to one of those Coleraine workshops. The Coleraine workshops have become quite famous. There used to be about 3 or 4 of them a year throughout the country. And you went there, you had to be accepted. You had to send in your book, and they had to say, yeah. And then you went, and all you did for 3 days was work on your book. It wasn't about individual poems. It wasn't about generating any new work. It was, how do you put together this book? What's the title? How do you organize it? And it was like boot camp. Man, we worked from dawn to dusk in small groups, and this group and that group. And that really helped me hone the Fates and get it really tight and really make it work. And then it was published within months after that, or accepted. And so I tried to use some of the same principles that I was taught there to do my next one. And one thing that they told us at Coleraine is, most full-length collections have sections to them. You don't want to just sit and read 70 poems usually. It helps. And but each of your sections should stand alone as a chapbook.
So that's one way to look at it. Yeah.
And so theoretically, if you had a 3-part book, you'd have 3 chapbooks in there. And as far as the rules of poetry, you can publish a chapbook and still put the chapbook in the main book. You can't publish a full collection and then take a chapbook out because there's all this previous published stuff,
Right. I didn't know that you could republish the chapbook as part of a longer manuscript. That's great.
I'm not sure every publisher would let you do that, but I've known people that have done it.
Right. Because it's a way of keeping yourself writing, getting things out,
and
accumulating your full-length manuscript. So thank you for telling us about that. So in the time that we have remaining, I would love to hear whatever poems you want to read to us.
Well, I want to read 2 more. Okay. I have 3 more, but we'll start with these 2 because another thing that I've done during the pandemic is make myself go on inspirational walks. I'm going to walk down to the beach. I'm usually by myself. And I tell myself when I start out, and I have my spirit guides, my poetry little council of angels and dead poets and stuff that's walking along with me. I also have an imaginary dog because I don't have a real dog. Everybody else here walks a dog. So I really tell people that's my dog down there. It's my imaginary dog. Anyway, so my dog and my angels and I start out. And I tell myself, I am going to find a poem. And I make myself find something that either is or can be a poem. And one of the ones that I like best that I did recently that just, a lot of like those sonnets are, it really, it's like you're in labor for a day and a half. But this poem just worked, and it said exactly what I wanted it to. And this is an absolutely 100% true poem, except for I changed her name. Okay. It's called Linda's Wish. My neighbor is out stacking firewood as I walk by. I am angry that her grandson doesn't help her more. She pays his tuition. I can almost hear her back ache, feel my own joints creak and grind as she bends and lifts. She looks up and waves, her face a mass of creases, hash marks made of sun and wind, and hard winters like this past one. I see she has swept her deck and pulled new weeds sprouting around dormant roses. She once told me, and I agreed, her worst fear was not pain or an evening's breathlessness. It was being a burden, waited on, time wasted on, stealing moments from others that could be romance or promotions or just rest. I turned the corner toward the mailboxes, feeling in my pocket a list of my own chores, and forgive her stubbornness. I even forgive that self-absorbed young man she says looks like her late husband. When I leave this world, I want to leave it clean, ironing my own clothes, vacuuming a worn carpet, maybe repainting the side door, or working alongside Linda, stacking that one last chord.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you. And because I live nearby, I can really walk with you in some other ways too, because I know that beach, I know these people, I know what they're doing. So I felt very much a part of this poem. I really like it, and I'm thrilled for you that it came easily.
Yes.
And I think we, as poets, have both kinds of experience. Sometimes that happens. I guess your angels and were with you and saw something that they knew you needed to write about. And sometimes it's a little harder to make the poem come, like the one about the anemones, but they come,
Yeah.
they come when we keep at it and practice. So what was the one or two more that you wanted to read?
Well, I wanted to read one kind of for our times. I've written a couple. I have one that I'm still working on enough. I don't think I want to read it yet, just about, well, systemic racism. You always think you're not racist, but everybody inside has some preconceived notions about something, and I've tried to write about that. But also one thing, of course, that's freaking all of us out now are this backlash against certain types of people. The backlash against Asian people because of COVID, which makes really no sense, but people are weird. But I have this poem, actually I wrote it a little while ago. It was first published in Switchgrass Review, and then my friend Carol Goss used it in her cooking blog. And but I thought it's a true poem about, I have this wonderful friend I've known all my life who actually did this thing, and she moved to Phoenix now rather than Seattle, and I'm sure she's doing the same thing. In fact, I know she is for other women right now. But this is called A Pear for Peace. Everyone has a right to pears, or a pomegranate, or the sift of flour unbleached. She volunteered in the wake of hatred to take Muslim women shopping, to pick them up in 2s and 3s, buckle them into her Prius, drive them to the neighborhood Safeway, Winco, cash and carry, and stand guard, a small dogged widow known only for banana bread and applesauce. They huddled together over a bin of plum like nuns wearing rainbow habits. They whispered about celery in voices of spice. And she wondered whether ignorance or envy made other carts rattle and lunge caged sabers, while she hovered near sweet potatoes, praying to a watermelon god, ready to take that first shove, spittled with threat. She went first at the checkout stand, helping each wife make change, pay nothing not owed for lentils or a green, ripe, seamless globe.
I can see her. I can see them. I can see the grocery store and the produce. It's very beautiful. And it's a wonderful way of showing us what we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And one more?
The last poem I'm going to read was also written during the pandemic. I have a little granddaughter in California, in San Diego, that comes up in the summer. I fly down and get her, and she stays for about a month and then goes back home. But it's always a great blessing. And she was 6 when I read this, but she was just starting to read, and she loves it up here. It wasn't quite as much fun this summer because the pool was closed and the Marine Science Center was closed and stuff, but she loves just to be outside. She loves all little creatures, and of course she loves the beach. But I was trying to help her read. She just starting to kind of learn to read, and she was struggling a little bit, but we managed to learn to read in a most unusual way. And this poem kind of goes with springtime, so I thought it would be a good one. And it's called Teaching My Granddaughter to Read, an ecology poem. She rejects the overused, colorless schoolroom words, the single syllables, the rude guttural of short A, E, and U. Instead, she memorizes the blossoming pages of my gardening catalog: chrysanthemum, nasturtium, hyacinth, phonics of stamen and petal. I explain that words are patterned on sound and shape. Readers need to know the hum of M and the hollow O in order to master books. She looks at me as if I've lost my mind, missed the whole point, and enunciates perennial, herbaceous. Not for her the cat and dog pages, the mother and father chapters looking nothing like her family. She continues to delve, never guesses, recognizes days later, vernal and autumnal, labors to train phrases together, after last frost, thin to 12 inches apart, and water. We both work hard on water and its attendant good drainage and irrigate at evening. She wakes eager for the glossy pages with photos of last May and all the Junes to come. Our fingers leave smudges where willing seeds sprout. Why wouldn't an author write lithospermum and hellebore? Why shouldn't someone 6 learn how Earth is meant to be read?
Beautiful, wonderful. She sounds like quite a child.
She is quite a child.
I'm so glad you captured that in a poem. And of course, with the sun finally breaking through the clouds here, just want to go outside and see the blossoms. They are coming. So Joanne, thank you so much. At the end here, I'd love it if you want to raise the books, if you have them in front of you,
Yes.
so you can see their covers. I have heard Joanne read, and they're beautiful poems. Fates.
The Fates, and here's Believing the Body.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
They have a lot of Fates down at Imprint Books. So,
all right, and Imprint is in Port Townsend, Washington. They also mail, and we'll be putting together a title card. So right when we say goodbye, you'll see a card that will give you the names and information about these books. And also, I'm remembering that you said the Fates had easy structure for you because there are only 3 of them. I will be thinking about that for a while. Thank you so much for your time today and for telling us about your writing life, your poetry, and for reading it. And our best wishes for you and your husband and his recovery.
Thank you, Sheila.
Yeah. Thank you.
And happy National Poetry Month, everyone.
Thank you.